On September 20th, 2017, I was on a plane to somewhere to do some work. I know that because I still have the note on my phone that I wrote on that flight. I had an audiobook version of Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. Listening to that on the plane was a profound experience. I have never felt so seen by somebody who could not see me. Page after page, she reached into my psyche, my soul, and said, "Hey, I see you. I see your shame. I see your fear. I see you hustling so hard for worthiness, and that it isn't working." As I listened, I started that note on my phone. Something would grab me, and I would stop, rewind, and listen again. Then I'd pause, write it down, hit play, only to stop and write again. Listen, stop, write, again and again, hours of it. It is still by far the longest note on my phone. I read through it when thinking about this reflection. It felt like reading a foundational document of me. I could see the way that she had nailed my past self and the compass points she'd given me to find my way forward. The bit that resonated the most with me for today was from the first of her 10 guideposts to wholehearted living, cultivating authenticity. She wrote, "Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and accepting who we actually are." That was at the core of my struggle. I wasn't accepting who I actually was. I was always operating out of this idea of who I should be, who I needed to be worthy, to be lovable, to be acceptable. Until then, I thought I'd been doing it right. I had a family, a house, a career, all the things I thought I was supposed to have. And I was living in my head, thinking, strategizing, reading the room, and shaping myself to fit in. And all the while, I was ignoring the wobbly, hurting, hollow feelings that drove me frantically forward. That book planted a lot of seeds in me. They took a while to germinate, to be sure, watered and fertilized by a lot of therapy and support, tough lessons learned, moments of vulnerability and fear, and daring to do things differently. And I'm certainly not done with that process. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I can find balance between my heart and my head, between my soft, gooey inside and my crunchy exterior. And not just find balance, but keep balance. Now, I'm much more likely to show people all of who I am, and my relationships are richer for it. I share my anxiety, my shame, my sadness. I ask for help or for someone to listen when help is not needed or possible. I feel calmer, lighter, more grounded, edging into wholeness. And showing myself lets others know I'm interested in relating on that level. Signals that I might just be safe enough for them to share themselves with me. It creates a virtuous cycle in my relationships where we are more able to ground each other and lift each other up. Feels really good. And like balance, this state is not static. It's a process of learning and correcting, of slipping and standing. Like Brené Brown wrote about authenticity, balance is a daily practice. These days for me, that looks like being enough in my authentic self to feel when my feet start to slip out from underneath me, to catch myself in a thought, a word, a gesture, and realize that I'm tilting out of balance. And to know in that moment that I have a choice. I have the choice to ease into that gentle slide into the warm pull of old habits, the false security of hiding my authentic self? Or to shift my weight, use my newly strengthened core muscles to pull me back upright, back into that temporary, shifting, always moving place of balance that I have come to value so much?
In my late 20s, I was accepted by the Peace Corps to be a volunteer in West Africa in a country called Mali. This was something that I had longed to do for years at that point. I had majored in international development and African studies. I had volunteered in a variety of nonprofits to shore up my transferable skills. I had learned French, and I had worked 2 jobs to save up money. I had read every book about West Africa that I could get my hands on. I had sold off most of my belongings and put the rest of them in my parents' basement. It was the culmination of many, many plans. In fact, one could make the case that I spent a little too much time preparing and planning, and not enough time just doing. I thought that I needed to be perfect before I would be worthy of doing the thing that I wanted, even though I was arguably well qualified well before I ever actually applied. I kept planning and preparing and putting off doing the actual work. But eventually, I landed in Bamako, and then in a little town called Sofara, which was on the Bani and Niger River Delta. I was thrilled to finally be there. And life in Mali, well, I felt so alive at that time and in that place. I was learning so much about a new culture, and I was learning so much about my own culture, things that I had taken for granted that I didn't know were true for me just because I was American. I was questioning all my assumptions about the way the world worked, about what it meant to be me in the world. And I hope that I was of service in some small way. I certainly made life-changing friendships. Volunteering for Peace Corps and moving to Mali remains to this day one of the very best decisions I have ever made. So it can sometimes be difficult to explain how and why I came to cut my time there short. I left before the 2-year period was up. In Peace Corps lingo, I ET'd, I early terminated. Last week in her reflection, Joyce Tischler, our worship associate, said that in her journey toward spiritual wholeness, she prioritizes consciously feeding her soul. She has spiritual practices that help her in that journey. Life in Mali definitely fed my soul. I had acres, buckets, a vast desert of free time. I read, and I prayed, and I journaled, and I took long walks. I played a lot of foosball with the kids on the end of the block. It's called baby foot in French, which I love. I listened a lot more than I talked. The pace of life was uncorrupted by late-stage capitalism, giving me plenty of time to cultivate that still small voice. And there was something very clarifying about being a fish out of water. So much of our brokenness as humans stems from trying to be what we think others want us to be, trying to blend in, trying to control the narrative, or in Greg's words from earlier, always operating out of this idea of who we should be, who we need to be in order to be worthy, to be lovable, to be acceptable. There is a West African proverb that says, no matter how long a log lies in a river, it will never become a crocodile. This girl was definitely a log. There was no way I could even approximate crocodile-like qualities. I was left with no choice but to be wholly myself, which was so liberating and clarifying. And I realized with all of this spiritual time that I was getting in this newfound listening to my inner voice, that for a whole host of reasons, and frankly, the reasons themselves are not really germane to the point of this story, but for a whole host of reasons, I realized that I needed to quit my job. This job that I loved, the job that I had longed for and planned for and prepared for and finally had, it wasn't the right place for me to be right then. I still had another 6 months left on my commitment. But there was somewhere else that was more important for me to be right then. This decision meant failing to follow through on a commitment. It meant there would be many people who perceived me as a failure, both there in Mali and at home. There would be those who said that I couldn't cut it, and trust me, PCVs, Peace Corps volunteers, are a macho bunch. I know at least 2 of them are in the room that can testify to this. They're a macho bunch who take being able to cut it seriously. I did not make this decision lightly, but it couldn't be ignored, its rightness. It welled up inside of me and could not be ignored. And this right here is the key part. When I first truly took the idea of quitting seriously, I had the split-second impulse to check in with my usual sounding boards. I should probably call my mom and talk this over with her, I thought. Or maybe I should write my friend Lori or go visit Paul. Because up until that point in my life, all of my major decisions had been made by committee. I had rarely trusted my own judgment enough to make a decision completely on my own. Because what if someone disapproved? What if I disappointed them? What if I revealed that I was not worthy, or wasn't lovable, or wasn't acceptable? But this time, that impulse to check in with the committee, it was fleeting. It was just a muscle memory. Because within seconds, I thought, no, I know what the right decision is. I don't need to consult anyone. I just need to inform them of my decision. I was, by any external objective measure, a very successful young adult. I am sure that anyone who knew me then would have described me as confident and capable. But that moment, it felt to me like the first truly adult decision I had ever made. I was 27 years old, and for the first time, I felt whole. Quitting Peace Corps and leaving Mali remains to this day one of the very best decisions I have ever made. I sure wish I could tell you that from that moment on, I had perfect clarity of purpose and the courage of my convictions never again failed. But of course, that is not true. Because wholeness is not an achievement that we unlock. We don't simply level up. As Greg so vividly stated earlier, like balance, Wholeness is not static. It's a process of leaning and correcting, slipping and standing. And it can be really easy to be knocked off balance. Illness, accidents, arguments with loved ones, world events, insecurities, traffic jams. Life comes at you and bam, there you are, confronted with your brokenness. The practice, the work, is to develop a feel for or a sense of that wholeness, what it is for you, so that you can learn to adjust accordingly. In the Golden Notebook, Doris Lessing, who for me is mighty, puts it this way. What about all those marvelous people we know, aged about 50 or 60? Well, there are a few. Marvelous, mature, wise people. Real people, the phrase is, radiating serenity. And how did they get to be that way? Well, we know, don't we? Every bloody one of them's got a history of emotional crime. You simply don't get to be wise, mature, etc., unless you've been a raving cannibal for 30 years or so. Lessing did not mean that only old people can be authentic and whole, and we're just going to roll with aged 50 or 60 meaning old here. When I first read the Golden Notebook in 1994, that's totally how I interpreted it. Lessing also did not mean that all old people are authentic and whole. That is very clear if you read the book. Wholeness is a practice no matter what age you are. As Brené Brown said, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and accepting who we actually are. And who are we, actually? What are we supposed to be accepting about our authentic selves? That we are broken. That's what we're trying to accept. We are working to accept that we are imperfect, flawed, unfinished, and that is okay. In fact, that can be breathtakingly beautiful. Last week, Reverend Marcia talked about the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi. For those of you who weren't here, I will summarize. The author, Richard Powell, who has written a couple of books about wabi-sabi for American audiences, says that wabi-sabi nurtures all that is authentic by acknowledging three simple realities. Nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. We could think of wabi-sabi as an ideal of imperfectionism, in which something is beautiful because it is flawed, because it is temporary, not despite it. The Japanese art of kintsugi, which we will have an image of in a moment, is an embodiment of wabi-sabi. Kintsugi means golden joinery or golden repair. And it consists of repairing broken pottery with golden or silver lacquer that actually highlights the flaw rather than trying to disguise it. In this way, the history of the object, even its brokenness, is acknowledged and celebrated. I love vintage pottery and dinnerware, especially mid-century modern pieces. Franciscan pottery is my particular weakness. I scour thrift stores for my favorite patterns, collecting several different designs. Mark, my love, describes me as a pottery prepper. I am fully capable of ensuring that most of the greater Portland area could still set a fine mid-mod table in almost any post-apocalyptic scenario. It is not just that I think that these dishes are beautiful. It's that I love imagining their histories in other families, wondering how they ended up on that shelf at the Salvation Army or Stars Market. And when one of them breaks, as they inevitably do from time to time, I feel such a sense of failure in my stewardship. Here, this beautiful dish was passed from hand to hand, gracing family dinners, washed and dried and stacked, boxed and packed for a move and unpacked for decades. But a few years in my keeping, and here it is in pieces. So when I first learned about the art of kintsugi, I was immediately won over. In fact, I have the special lacquer and the gold powder and a box of broken pottery in my basement right now. It's been there for a few years, actually. Periodically, I add a new broken antique dish. I have watched many YouTube videos on how to do the repairs, but I have yet to actually ever use those materials to repair anything. I keep planning and preparing and putting off doing the actual work. If I am honest with myself, part of the problem, and trust me, I appreciate the irony here, I really do, part of the problem is that I am afraid that I will repair them wrong. Sitting there broken, they have the potential to be made whole. But if I attempt to make them whole and I fail, I fear that they will be permanently broken. I know the theory. I believe that they could be stronger and even more beautiful, even if I'm, on a learning curve. I value the potential of those dishes. They were broken on my watch. They're my responsibility. I have the best of intentions. Last week in her sermon, Reverend Marcia asked us, what could we learn from the beautiful imperfection, about doing harm and asking forgiveness, about engaging in reconciliation and repair? She wasn't talking about pottery. I know that. But as I was thinking about today's sermon, I kept coming back to me and my little box of broken pottery that I keep planning and preparing to repair. My box of broken pottery and I have a lot in common, I think, with what is broken in America and the world today. Liberals in America have historically and today allowed a lot of relationships to be broken on our watch. Relationships with varied, marginalized communities, with individuals within our own communities who are marginalized. We have habits of consumption and habits of complacency that continue to cause harm in those relationships. Maybe we're so busy trying to prove our wholeness to those around us that we refuse to admit that we may be part of the problem. Not me, I'm one of the good ones. Or maybe we do accept our part in how these relationships were broken, and we mourn that they are broken, and we know that they are at least in part our responsibility, and we want to repair them. We intend to repair them. We have the best of intentions, in fact. We keep planning and preparing and yet putting off doing the actual work. We're often afraid to start the work of reconciliation and repair. We're afraid that we will just make it worse, and that in doing so, we will reveal our brokenness, which, we hope that we have kept secret. We're just a log jam of indecision and anxiety, not a crocodile in sight. We imagine that we have to get it perfect, instead of accepting that from the outset, we can't possibly get it perfect, because nothing and no one is. But the work is still worthwhile. In fact, it might be the only thing that is. And we will never repair anything if we don't allow ourselves to try and fail and accept ourselves just as we are. We must own our brokenness, accept that we are never perfect, never finished, and that we only have a limited time on earth to truly live our values. Let's marvel at the beauty of that opportunity. And let's get to work. May it be so. Amen.